And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today is January the 30th day of this new year. Just 35 days remain to the year's over with. We'll start a new one. Holidays and observances. National Fun at Work Day. Create laughter and good vibes while tackling tasks at work. The office can become a playground of camaraderie where work and play actually mingle. National Draw a Dinosaur Day. Those species of animals that once roamed the earth that have been extinct for many thousands of years. National Croissant Day. National Escape Day. Celebrate the little things in life with smiles and laughter and reminder to find joy every day. National Preschool Health and Fitness Day. National Big Wig Day. Yodel for Your Neighbors Day. Evoking joy and wonder, this unique and traditional vocal technique is an art form that brings people together in celebration of life. And it's definitely an interesting way to start a day. School Day of Nonviolence and Peace. National Inane Answering Machine Day. Answering Machine Message Day, that is. World Neglected Tropical Disease Day. Family Mediation Week. Suits and Sneakers for Cancer Week. Artes Mundi. Catholic Schools Week. National School Choice Week. And Snow Sculpting Week. We actually had snow here this past Sunday. Well, famous people born on this date: Franklin D. Roosevelt, Christian Bale, Dick Cheney, Gene Hackman, and Vilma Valderrama from NCIS. Well, famous people born on this date? No. That has been finished. We're now going to do stories in the news. Well, Christy Noem reveals her message for Minnesota leaders Tim Walz and Jacob Frey. Walz, of course, is the governor and Frey is the mayor of Minneapolis. And she addresses the cause for her firing in a new Alex Preto-related video. Department of Homeland Security Secretary Christy Noem said radicals are targeting her as calls for her firing intensify amid an aggressive immigration crackdown in Minnesota. She said, "These radicals are attacking me, but I'm just doing my job. I'm following the law, enforcing the laws like President Trump promised he'd do to keep people safe in this country." She said that while appearing on Hannity. Her comments came as she faces mounting criticism following the fatal shooting of Alex Preti and Renee Good by federal agents during immigration enforcement operations in the North Star State. Several prominent Democrats have recently called for her removal as DHS Secretary, including Senator John Fetterman, Democrat of Pennsylvania, and California Governor Gavin Newsom. Now, if Newsom gets behind something, you know everybody's going to support it. Yeah, right. She said, according to Newsom, Americans have died. She's betraying DHS's mission and trashing your border security legacy. Don't make the mistake President Biden did for not firing a grossly incompetent DHS secretary. That was supported by Newsom, but said by Fetterman. Well, don't you hate it when a computer decides to do its own thing? Well, Governor Abbott of Texas issues disaster declaration to prevent screwworm fly infestation from spreading into Texas. Issued a statewide disaster declaration Thursday to prevent the potential spread of the New World screwworm fly into the lower Lone Star State as he seeks to better protect livestock and wildlife. Governor's declaration allows the Texas New World screwworm response team to use all state government prevention and response resources to prevent the spread of this parasite into Texas. The New World screwworm fly is spreading north from Mexico toward the border it shares with the U.S. Although the New World screwworm fly is not yet present in Texas or the U.S., its northward spread from Mexico toward the U.S. Southern border poses a serious threat to Texas' livestock industry and wildlife, he said. State law authorizes him to prevent a threat of infestation that would cause severe damage to Texas property. And he says, I'm not going to wait for such harm to reach our livestock and wildlife. With the statewide disaster declaration, the governor said the Texas New World Screwworm Response Team, man, what a name, can fully utilize all state government prevention and response resources to prevent the reemergence of this destructive parasite. Well, a video shows airport bystander body slamming a TSA breach suspect in a split-second takedown. Newly released surveillance footage has captured the tense moment a suspect breached a TSA checkpoint at an Atlanta airport last year, only to be tackled by a bystander and subdued within seconds. Police released the footage through an open public records request showing the incident unfolding on the morning of October 30th at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. Suspect was identified as 40-year-old Fabian Leon, was later charged with a simple battery and avoiding security measures. In the footage, he appears to rush through the airport before attempting to enter the TSA checkpoint. As he approached the initial screening area, he appeared to aggressively push past an agent, knocking the officer to the ground and stumbling over him in the process. Well, they didn't say what he might have had, but he was determined he was going to get it on the plane. Well, the CCP, Connected Millionaire, allegedly bankrolls Minneapolis agitator groups through a dark money network. You know, as agitators and federal law enforcement continue to clash in Minneapolis, the funding behind the groups fueling the anti-U.S. immigration and customs enforcement unrest is beginning to come to light. One of the alleged financial backers of these agitators is a Chinese Communist Party advocate traced to a multitude of dark money organizations known to fuel far-left, CCP-influenced extremism in the U.S. And earlier this week, a Fox News investigation found several organizations are acting as lead voices and physically mobilizing agitators in Minneapolis. One is communicating through multiple channels to encourage agitators to take to the streets of Minneapolis and a number of other cities. The Party for Socialism and Liberation and the People's Forum are two of the core groups allegedly been behind facilitating and pushing agitators to organize on multiple occasions. Both organizations are largely subsidized by American former tech mogul Neville Roy Singham, according to reports and congressional probes. And despite Singham facing federal investigations stretching back decades, a former federal prosecutor told Fox News the multimillionaire's move to China essentially shields him from being subpoenaed by U.S. authorities. Now, a man fights to get to the top of the financial world, only to hand it over to the Chinese communist. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Well, President Trump has announced his pick for Federal Reserve Chair. He's nominated Kevin Warsh. He's consistently criticized federal leadership. President Trump said today he plans to nominate Warsh, that's W-A-R-S-H, by the way, to lead the Federal Reserve, replacing Jerome Powell when his term expires in May. The move comes at a turbulent moment for the Federal Reserve as the Justice Department conducts a criminal probe into Powell. The Supreme Court weighs limits on the Fed's independence and cost of living test President Trump's economic agenda. On Truth Social, President Trump wrote, "I've known Kevin for a long time, have no doubt he'll go down as one of the great Fed chairmen, maybe the best. Top of everything else, he's central casting and never let you down. Congratulations, Kevin." Well, if confirmed by the Senate, Warsh would assume one of the most powerful positions in U.S. economic policymaking, having direct influence over interest rate decisions and the central bank's battle against inflation. Well, a Michigan family says the county seized their home over a tax bill they didn't owe. and that case is now heading for the Supreme Court. Michigan family says a minor tax dispute cost them their home, and now they're taking their property rights fight all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. The estate of Scott Pung, P-U-N-G, argues Isabella County, Michigan officials committed unconstitutional home equity theft by seizing a nearly $200,000 house to satisfy a debt that grew from a $1,600 tax dispute to $2,242 with interest and penalties. He said, somehow we lost the house. I still don't quite understand it. That was from Tia Pung. She told Fox News the taxes have been paid, never missed a payment, never late. Then that $1,600 wasn't paid, and they filed for foreclosure. It's simply mind-boggling. Well, there are government officials with way too much power and not enough common sense. Well, President Trump and Schumer have reached a government funding deal, sacrificing a DHS spending bill in the process. Senate Democrats and the White House reached a deal to fund the government, but lawmakers aren't out of the woods for averting a partial shutdown yet. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat of New York, and President Trump labored over a deal late Wednesday night till Thursday evening after the top Senate Democrat unleashed several funding demands, and White House accused Schumer of blocking a meeting with rank-and-file Democrats. Schumer needs to get a real job and quit bothering the rest of us. According to Schumer, the separation of the 5 bipartisan bills the Democrats asked for, plus a 2-week DHS continuing resolution, has been agreed to. President Trump, in a post on Truth Social, said the only thing that can slow our country down is another long and damaging government shutdown, which Schumer's more than happy to give everybody. Well, a lot of folks are asking why President Trump sent Tom Homan to Minnesota, and it's said to be a stroke of absolute genius. This week, President Trump's decision to deploy former U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Director and current border czar Tom Homan to Minnesota signals a deliberate and strategic approach to public safety. This was grounded in accountability and a deep understanding of how law enforcement operates. Minnesota has become a flashpoint in the national immigration debate. Already in focus for widespread fraud, Minneapolis is ground zero for violent protest, ICE operations, and 2 fatal officer-involved shootings. State and local officials have responded by demanding limits on federal enforcement activity, with some openly calling for ICE to withdraw from the state altogether. At the same time, progressives in Congress are outright calling for the abolishment of ICE. I guess we'll just politely ask the illegals if they would please leave the country. Of course, they're going to follow the law. Well, U.S. Olympic gold medalist Sha'Carri Richardson has been arrested for speeding in the latest legal struggle. She's a U.S. Olympic sprinter, arrested on a speeding charge after allegedly driving more than 100 miles per hour in Florida on Thursday. Authorities said she was driving 104 miles per hour and dangerously passing other motorists on the highway. It's the latest controversy in a growing series of off-track issues for the American gold medalist. In August, she was arrested for allegedly assaulting her boyfriend, fellow American sprinter Christian Coleman, at Seattle-Tacoma Airport. Security footage of that incident showed her approaching Coleman from out of frame and appears to grab his backpack from behind. He appeared to grill Coleman and Richardson appeared to grill Coleman and nudged him before shoving him into a wall, nudging him more later on. Two appeared to exchange words while walking towards security, with Richardson still nudging him and appearing to reach for his face. Coleman declined to pursue the case, according to a police report. In January 2023, Richardson was booted off a plane after a dispute with a flight attendant who she said spoke to her in a disrespectful manner. Apparently, she feels she is above the little people. Well, Sydney Sweeney has sent fans into a frenzy with salty lingerie snaps of her new brand. She continues to take the internet by storm at the launch of her new lingerie line, SYRN. Siren, I guess it is. On Thursday, the Euphoria actress, who dropped her line on January 28th, left fans reeling over her risque lingerie photos. The true star of Hollywood, according to one fan on Instagram. She just killed the game, another one said, and a third one wrote, "You're simply gorgeous." On Tuesday, the 28-year-old actress took to social media to announce the January 28th launch of Siren, pronounced Siren, with sizzling new promotional photos. She said, "I was in the 6th grade with double D's. I hated the bra I had to wear," she said in a statement through a press release obtained by Fox News. "When I bought my first cute bra that actually fit, I wore it to pieces. Designing for different bodies is a huge part of Siren." Well, AOC has voiced support for anti-ICE shutdown, declines to participate. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Democrat of New York, pledged to full support for a nationwide anti-ICE protest scheduled for Friday. Said her office would not participate. Organizers of the national shutdown campaign have called for no school, no work, no shopping on Friday, arguing enough is enough in the wake of fatal shootings involving Alex Prenti and Renee Good in Minneapolis and amid a federal immigration crackdown across Minnesota. People of the Twin Cities have shown the way for the whole country, she said. To stop ISIS's reign of terror, we need to shut it down. Ocasio-Cortez, who's criticized the Trump administration's immigration enforcement tactics in that state, said her office would not be shutting down. It's interesting. She lords her brilliance over the rest of us when she looks, acts, and talks like what she was, which was a bartender. If you've ever noticed, you can solve every problem in the world behind the bar. The fact that it might not work in the real world is irrelevant. Well, big tech's tobacco moments here, and the truth about harming kids is out. For over a decade, child victims and their parents have been denied the chance to get justice for the harms they've suffered from social media products, ranging from anxiety, depression, eating disorders, substance abuse disorders, suicide, sextortion, and in the starkest cases, death. Starting this week, they'll finally have their day in court. On Tuesday, the first bellwether trial against social media companies began in Los Angeles, serving as the initial test case for many more pending lawsuits. Meta and TikTok, Snap, and YouTube face more than 3,000 lawsuits in California alone, along with more than 2,000 additional cases in federal court. Well, another big company's left California and headed to Florida. Quantum computing company joins exodus from the high taxes of California. D-Wave Quantum joins a growing list of tech firms relocating to the Sunshine State out of California. As states compete for the next generation of high-tech, innovation-driven jobs, Florida scored another major win. D-Wave Quantum Incorporated, a publicly traded pioneer in quantum computing, announced to relocate its corporate headquarters from Silicon Valley to Boca Raton, Florida. Excuse me. Betting on the state's rapidly expanding technology ecosystem. We'll see how that works out for them. Well, Jesse Waters made the comment, Minnesota leaders will talk tough, but they'll negotiate when there's nobody looking. And quite often, that's quite true. Well, a nor'easter bomb cyclone is going to blast the Carolinas with heavy snow and coastal flooding. Parts of the Carolinas could see their heaviest snowfall in years as a massive nor'easter brings up to a foot of snow and dangerous winds. I heard on the news yesterday there may be more snow here, with what we got on Sunday. It wasn't a lot, but it was still enough to stop this town. Well, Melania Trump has premiered a personal film at the star-studded Kennedy Center event. President Trump said Melania's been more outspoken this term at the Trump Kennedy Center documentary premiere. They hit the red carpet for the Melania documentary. And they hit the red carpet with several famous friends ahead of the world premiere of that new documentary at the Trump Kennedy Center. The film from Amazon MGM Studios, directed by Brent Ratner, chronicles the First Lady's life leading up to Trump's 2025 inauguration from her home in Trump Tower in New York City to Mar-a-Lago and Palm Beach, and captures behind-the-scenes moments at the White House. Documentary is the debut project from the First Lady's new film production companies, Muse Films. Well, having lived in Trump Tower for several years, I can tell you that's a world unto itself. Well, Ms. Rachel faces backlash as social activism enters childhood education, don't you know? For millions of American parents and grandparents, Ms. Rachel is not just a celebrity, a social media influencer, but a daily presence in their living rooms. Her voice plays on TVs and tablets and phones during a child's earliest years as part of her educational programming for toddlers. Well, her real name is Rachel Griffin Curzo, face behind the vital YouTube series Songs for Littles. Over the past 6 years, Curzo has grown the brand from homemade videos to a multi-million-dollar children's entertainment operation. Focuses on early language development for babies and toddlers. As her audience and influence has grown, she's increasingly drawn criticism from some parents over her public political and social activity, leading some families to question whether the content remains strictly educational. Well, part of the problem is that folks get to a certain level, they really believe they're smarter than everybody else, and their view of the world is the view that ought to lead the way. Well, an 80-year-old lottery winner has been sentenced for bankrolling a $400 million drug empire from a cottage with his son. Authorities announced Wednesday an elderly man who used his 2010 lottery winnings to run a drug empire out of his cottage alongside his son and two accomplices has been sentenced to jail. John Alex Spivey, 80 years old, was sentenced to 16 years in prison in England after an investigation uncovered counterfeit pills worth up to $400 million. That's according to the Greater Manchester Police. His son, John Colin Spivey, 37, was also sentenced to 9 years. According to Alex Brown, a detective inspector of the Serious Organized Crime Group, they operated a fully industrialized drug manufacturing business capable of producing millions of counterfeit tablets containing a highly dangerous substance. And the volume of tablets that we recovered, along with the sophisticated machinery, demonstrated how deeply embedded this group was in the illicit drug supply chain. The local United Kingdom outlet, the LBC, reported that Spivey won the national lottery in 2010. At about 65 years old, cashing in 2.4 million pounds. That's equivalent to about 3.3 million in 2026. During the sentencing, Judge Nicholas Clark, KC, told LBC, despite your lottery win, you continue to live your life of crime beyond what would be a normal retirement age. And that's just a bad thing to do. Well, Trump and the GOP eye the midterm convention cities and high-stakes bid to hold on to the House and the Senate. President Trump likes the idea of holding the GOP's first-ever midterm convention later this year in Nevada or Texas, according to people involved in the discussion. But those sources also say the president's initial preferences don't mean the other cities are off the list of convention host city contenders. Fox News Digital's first reported the Republican National Committee last week took a big step toward holding the convention by approving a change to the party's rules that would allow Chairman Joe Gruters to convene a convention during a midterm election year. Gruters, speaking with reporters after the RNC greenlighted the midterm convention, called it a Trumpapalooza, where he would really highlight all the incredible things this president has done. Well, on that note, we finished our news stories. We're going to go to our main story for today. We're still talking about strange, off-the-wall conspiracy theories. You know, there's a lot of strange conspiracy theories that most folks never heard of. You know, not every conspiracy theory involves global conglomerates attempting to dictate to the world the direction humanity ought to take. In some instances, it can be pride as well as profits that cause people to enter into and conspire in a conspiracy. And in certain situations, some people may choose to subvert and alter the true nature of things for their own personal gain. Let's talk about the case of Garry Kasparov versus the chess computer, Deep Blue. That's the computer manufacturer IBM has been accused of cheating the renowned grandmaster out of his legitimate victory. The story of Garry Kasparov versus the machine can be read as a steady parallel to the development of the personal computer. Early 1990s, as more and more people have become familiar with the idea of just how powerful and useful computers could be, IBM was one of the major dominant forces in the world of computing. Despite one time IBM chairman Thomas Watson predicting that I think there's a world market for maybe 5 computers. Well, the rise of the machines in the workplace and the home brought with it an increased awareness of what they were actually capable of doing. In accordance, it was felt that a public display of the computing strength would be a boost for the IBM and would allow them to demonstrate the capabilities of their machines. So in order to achieve the maximum impact, they recruited famed chess grandmaster Garry Kasparov and challenged him to a game. Well, chess is one of the world's oldest games, and there's a near infinite number of ways in which a game can pan out, and playing the game in just a process of weighing up the suitability of every single move at one possible moment. Well, there's the rules and the history of the game. Any computer attempting to play chess will need to comprehend strategy and tactics in an intelligent manner. And not only this, but they need to implement these qualities when coming up against one of the best players in the world. While the rudimentary chess program has been created many decades earlier, IBM created a dedicated supercomputer purely for the 1989 match against Kasparov, and they named it Deep Thought, named for the computer in Douglas Adams' famed series, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Well, the first match between Garry Kasparov and Deep Thought passed by as many assumed such a match would. Human player beat the computer with a fair degree of comfort, but he was quick to praise the engineers and programmers of the machine for their ability to present him was something of a challenge, don't you know? Never one to shy away from publicity, Kasparov emerged from the bout with a heightened media profile, while the IBM employees soon decided to reinvent their machine to better take on the chess player. Well, in doing that, they created a computer they called Deep Blue, playing on IBM's colloquially nicknamed Big Blue. I worked with another grandmaster, Joel Benjamin, to redesign the way the computer approached the openings of the game. IBM faced their new baby up against alternative computers and fixed and fiddled and bumped up the capabilities of the machine until they once again felt they might be able to take on Kasparov. Well, the key conspiracy theory revolves around the next 2 games. The first was played in 1996, and for a while it seemed the machine had been raised up to a surprisingly good level. While the Russian grandmaster won 3 of the games and drew 2, the IBM machine became the first computer to ever win a game of chess against the reigning world champion. That series of games lasted a week. It was clear to the audience this matchup was far more challenging to Kasparov than the earlier series of games. And just over years later, the combatants were set to face one another once again. During this intervening period, IBM took the time to perform some heavy upgrades to their machine. Taking on Garry Kasparov in May of 1997, the machine this time emerged victorious. After 6 games, the computer led the world champion by 3.5 to 2.5. And winning that 6th game, IBM's creation became the first computer program to triumph over a reigning world champion in a standard match. And this ability came not wholly from the refined programming knowledge and abilities of the computer, but mostly from the brute force abilities its computerizing architecture provided. As one of the most powerful supercomputers on the planet, it could consider the potential for up to 200 million different moves every single second. Twice as powerful as the computer Kasparov had beaten the year before. When planning ahead in the game, Deep Blue would typically think up 8 moves ahead and had the ability to consider nearly 20 moves in advance. The program was designed not simply to win, but to evaluate the state of the board at any given moment. Should it protect the king? Should it try and capitalize on a space advantage in the center? Should it attempt to orchestrate additional space in a different area of the board? While these processes might seem instinctual to the human chess player, they had to be written into the code of the machine. Well, as well as this programming, Deep Blue was loaded with excuse me, You think details of thousands of games between the greatest chess grandmasters. Well, I don't know why I'm coughing so much today. I do apologize. And although the computer could analyze these move sets for patterns and ideas, the machine was incapable of truly creating original play. The knowledge loaded into the machine was refined not only by Joel Benjamin, but also by a further group of grandmasters, including Nick de Fermian, John Fedorovich, and Miguel Ilescas. While the computers loaded with nearly 700,000 older games, including those by Kasparov, any request from the grandmaster he be allowed access to the computer's previous matches was denied. Instead, Kasparov had to turn to other computer programs in order to try and get an understanding of how a machine might play the game. The machine, said IBM, been programmed to win chess matches, and the victory it had over Kasparov was proof of their ability to build and program incredibly complex and cutting-edge computers. Well, as you might guess, Kasparov was not pleased. Aftermath of the match in '97 wasn't pleasant. Instead of being beaten by a machine, the grandmaster claimed to have noticed examples of truly deep intelligence behind the computer's moves. Instead of brute force computing, he claimed to have seen examples of creativity in its play that wasn't present in the early machines. It was his assertion he had not played against a machine. Instead, he'd come up against both the machine and its creators who had intervened in the game. This, if it was proven to be true, would be a clear violation of the rules that both parties had agreed to before the match took place. Kasparov was certain that a conspiracy was in place to guarantee the machine victory and provide IBM with the reigning world champion. Well, in order to chase down his accusations, he requested to be provided with the log files from the machine. The developers of Deep Blue were allowed to make changes to the programs between games in order to address weaknesses and issues that arose during play. When Kasparov requested the printout of these changes, he was again denied. And though those files would eventually be placed on the internet, the fact that they were denied to the grandmaster only further cemented his theory. And the Russians demanded a rematch, as he himself had granted IBM. But again, IBM refused and even went as far as dismantling the computer after the match. But for Kasparov, one of the key moments of the game and part of the foundation of his case against the company was a strange move that occurred in the first game. In the 44th move, Kasparov was shocked during the game. It seemed to him to be a result of true intelligence, unlike anything the machine had played in any of the prior games. Grandmaster's mind stuck on this move, and he suggested that the anxiety and concern it prompted resulted in a drop in his abilities to perform in the next game. And for writer Nate Siller, this move was the result of a bug in a software that IBM wrote and was not intentional. For Kasparov, it was the key piece of evidence to show the machine was not playing alone. Well, in the documentary produced after the controversy game, entitled Game Over, Kasparov and the Machine, the filmmakers conducted a number of interviews in which the idea of IBM's stock price is mentioned. With all the publicity surrounding the match, the opportunity to finally beat a human world champion at the game of chess resulted in a boost to the stock price of the computer company, inflated their value by millions of dollars. And that was enough of a motivation to interfere with the programming of the computer, with only a slight change and a slight breaking of the rules being sufficient to disrupt Kasparov's regular game. The slight intervention by the designers of the machine was enough to boost stock prices by a huge margin and provide a decent motivation to enter into a conspiracy against the Russian grandmaster. According to Kasparov, Deep Blue has become a world-famous event. The immediate refusal of the computer firm to deny the grandmaster any chance for a rematch meant it was the final chapter in a succession of games between IBM's machines and Kasparov. And at first glance, it seems as though gradual improvements in raw computing power are eventually enough to overcome the world champion at his own game, and to cement IBM's position as the leading manufacturer of powerful supercomputers on the world stage. But for IBM, unfortunately, it's not quite so simple. As Garry Kasparov himself has maintained, the details don't add up. Forced into a corner, denied the chance to study the computer's game beforehand, he came up against an unknown foe. When this foe began to act erratically and display elements of truly creative intelligence, it was enough to trigger warning signs in Kasparov's mind. And these played upon the thoughts and proved to be enough to lead to his downfall. And his theory that the designers of Deep Blue conspired against him in an effort to prove the company's value on the world stage. With so much money and influence at stake, the small details, the refusal of access to the log files, the denials of a rematch, and the immediate dismantling of the machine, all added up to an increased level of suspicion by Gary Kasparov and his supporters. Well, as with many conventional conspiracy theories, the deeper one delves, the less and less the accusations begin to look as though they stem from simple paranoia. The great deal of gain from potential victory, what was to prevent IBM from slightly turning the tide in their favor? Though these accusations have long been forgotten while the results of the match live on, it's important to consider the truth behind the battle between man and machine. Well, from supercomputers that can play chess, let's talk about a topic I've had a number of comments made about: chemtrails. One continued convention of the world of conspiracy theories is to seize on the incredibly familiar and try and discover the true ulterior motive behind the mundane. One of the best examples of this is the conspiracy theory that suggests that chemtrails may be far more sinister than you might ever have imagined. If you're not aware, a chemtrail is the trail left through the sky when a jet plane or airliner passes overhead. Look up on any given day and you may well see many examples of these trails as they crisscross the sky, but whereas conventional knowledge would suggest these are the byproduct of the engines used by the plane, the conspiracy theory believes they're in fact chemical and biological products that are being spread across the unsuspecting public by the government. As far as typical conspiratorial paranoia goes, it ranks among those paranoid theories around and is also one of the most popular. Well, conventional wisdom from the scientific community has dismissed the theory surrounding the supposed chemtrails. This theory suggests the contrails are normally left by high-flying aircraft are quick to dissipate, and those that linger in the sky are in fact filled with chemicals or biological agents that the public aren't told about. However, the generally held response to these conspiratorial claims is that these are typical water-based trails that you should expect to be left behind. I've seen some here that start out very narrow and spread to cover most of the sky. Depending on the atmospheric conditions present at any given time, the existence of the trails is to be entirely expected. Then falls on the proponents of the theory to prove the chemtrails are spread malicious intent, with the majority of people happy to accept the conventional wisdom regarding these phenomena. Maybe it helps to start our investigation with an explanation of the word chemtrail itself. The world is what's known as a portmanteau, a combination of chemical and trail. It follows from the word contrail, which is a similar combination of condensation and trail. Gives us an indication of the key issue believers have with the idea of chemtrails, namely the combination you might expect has been replaced by some kind of nefarious chemical. Spread from a height of some 5 to 10 miles, these chemtrails or these chemicals could well have numerous purposes. Suggested theories have included everything from population control to the management of solar radiation. Conspiracy theory is complex in that it doesn't have one agreed upon function for the use of chemtrails. So whether they designed to control the weather, control people, or start psychological warfare, how did people come to suspect these contrails? Well, researchers have traced these theories about the chemtrails back to 1996. At that point in time, the U.S. Air Force had been accused of spreading mysterious substances across the country and spraying the population of the U.S. People had noticed that the patterns of their aircraft had been producing unusual contrails and contrail patterns. In response, the Air Force simply claimed that these accusations were unsubstantiated and the result of a hoax. They followed many of the accusations back to a paper published at the military's own Air University, a paper that was concerned with the potential to control the weather in any given theory of war. This paper suggested by 2025 the Air Force might be able to alter the weather conditions in battle zones in order to gain an advantage. And though it was a real strategic paper, the government agencies reiterated many times it was based on fictional theorizing of potential futures and future technologies. Went even further to confirm that such strategies were not under legitimate consideration, nor were they possible with current technology. And as well as this, the Air Force, clearly perturbed by the suggestion he might be involved in such practices, went a step further in order to confirm that the majority of the scientists they consulted were prepared to confirm the benign nature of the contrails seen in the skies over America. Well, as with any good conspiracy theory, government simply denying the possibility of something being true wasn't nearly enough for a theory like chemtrails to be rejected. The publication Skeptical Inquirer, that prides itself on looking closely at alternative truths, suggested the idea of chemtrails became popular during the 1990s, but quickly spread across late-night radio shows and through the work of journalists such as William Thomas. It was, they acknowledged, something that was rarely mentioned in the mainstream media outlets. But it wasn't an exclusive American theory, not by any means. In the UK, politicians are being asked similar questions. First of these questions directly asked the government what it was doing to combat the possibility of polluting effects of these aircraft. In response, the Secretary of State working for the Department of Environment, Food, and Rural Affairs simply stated they planned to conduct no such investigation, simply because the phenomena wasn't widely recognized by scientists the world over. They did, however, admit that some research is being done into the nature of contrails. There was little in the way of results that was worth mentioning at the time. Similarly, questions were put to the Canadian government with individuals concerned about the effects of aerial spraying and how they might affect the public. Again, they were told by government officials there was no evidence for the idea that high-altitude spraying was taking place in Canada. Almost every instance, there was insistence that the members of the public had been seeing normal, non-threatening contrails and mistaking them for the purported chemtrails they'd heard about. Well, since that time, numerous governments across the world have reiterated the idea that chemtrails do not exist or that contrails that people see are not harmful. But there does exist a small subset of the population that believes otherwise. And though there's not an overriding consensus on the matter, there are a number of ideas that are agreed upon. First of these is that contrails and chemtrails can be recognized as different even from the ground. Unlike contrails, the chemical equivalent will linger in the air for a lot longer. These can stay around for up to 12 hours or can even dissolve into something resembling a normal cirrus cloud formation. One common proclamation is that chemtrails, as they first emerged in the mid-90s, were slightly different and stayed even longer in the sky. Chemical makeup of the chemtrails has been discussed at length in the conspiracy community. There have been suggestions that barium, polymer fibers, aluminum salts, or thorium can be found in the residue. Others have suggested the trails are conduits for a hugely powerful electromagnetic weapon. Each individual's theory regarding the chemical composition of the chemtrails typically depends on what that individual's particular reasoning as to their motivations for their use. Weapons testing, population control, and weather modification all dictate that different chemicals or biological agents has to be used by the government. Putting together a firm picture of the composition of the chemtrails is almost impossible, as it would involve coming to a general consensus on the purpose of the phenomena. In order to delve deeper into their purpose, it might help to think about the evidence that does exist. Aside from the continued assertion that the chemtrails do exist, the most famous pieces of evidence are the photographs that purport to show the insides of passenger aircraft with large barrels placed where the seats were normally found. And it also shows wires and tubes coming out of the barrels. Proponents of the theory claim that this is a documented example of the production of chemtrails. But this has been countered by the aviation industry, who claim the purpose of the barrels is to simulate and approximate the weight of passengers during the testing phase of a plane's development. The barrels are filled with water, which is then pumped between the barrels in order to test various centers of gravity. The commonly cited piece of evidence is a television report broadcast in 2007 about a news program in Louisiana, of all places. During that piece, a supposed section of a chemtrails testing found to be containing higher than normal levels of barium, and almost 3 times the limit allowed by the U.S. government. However, critics point out that the testing equipment wasn't used correctly and thus exaggerated the findings and threw the results off by a factor of 100. So as such, the levels of barium were indeed safe. And one of the strangest pieces of evidence was made famous thanks to Congressman Dennis Kucinich. 2001, Kucinich brought the Space Preservation Act of 2001 to the attention of Congress. Now, it has to be noted he did not author that piece, but merely introduced it. Had the act passed, it would have banned the possibility of government basing weapons in space at any point in the future. Among the examples listed in the literature were chemtrails, described as an exotic weapon among the types to be banned. And for believers in the conspiracy theory, this piece of legislation is seen as an official acknowledgement by the government that such chemtrails do exist and they could be used as weapons. That same bill, though, does mention other exotic weapons, including those that are extraterrestrial and tectonic. Nevertheless, the bill was met favorably and failed to pass. All future attempts to pass a similar bill, it has been noted, did not include chemtrails in their wording. And for believers in this particular conspiracy, this is only further proof that the inclusion in the document was an acknowledgement by the government of the existence of the rogue contrails. But trying to pin down an accurate depiction of the theory about chemtrails is very difficult. Due to their very nature, they're hard to examine up close. Can be attributed to anything, and any amount of evidence against their existence always comes from those who are firmly rooted within the system itself. As such, they're an example of the classic conspiracy language whereby the theory can mean a huge amount to many and many different people. The huge amount of science and research we have concerning jet planes in the atmosphere simply points to contrails being a benign phenomena. But for anybody who seeks to prove this particular theory correct, the concept of chemtrails can be molded and altered to fit pre-existing stereotypes. And for example, we know that contrails are formed when water vapors emitted from piston and jet engines at extreme altitudes, with the vapor then condensing and forming a cloud. The hot air emitted by the engines mixes with the cold exterior air to form contrails, and depending on the prevailing weather conditions, they may stay in the sky for extended periods of time. All the research that has been conducted and published at this point indicates this is to be expected and is simply a result of typical aviation travel. Instead, though, the chemtrails give those with keen imaginations the perfect canvas on which to project their ideas. Contrails are familiar to the majority of people, while at the same time few people can explain the exact mechanics behind their appearance and their lingering in the sky. So I'm presented with two alternative theories. They're simply a byproduct of air travel, or they're part of a larger conspiracy. The second idea, of course, is more interesting and exciting. Situations like this can be typical human nature to favor that which we find to be more entertaining, and which can also be used to explain various other conspiracies from across the world. But Bob Berman, an astronomer, raises a good point about the chemtrails. It's his assertion that this is the perfect situation in which to apply Occam's razor. Occam's razor is a philosophical tool that suggests that when presented with two competing ideas, you always favor the one that's based on the fewest assumptions. This favoring of the simplest solution should suggest that the idea of a global, complicated, and fairly recent conspiracy to douse the world with chemical using jet planes is less likely than the idea that contrails are simply induced during regular flights. In this respect, of course, solving the mystery of the chemtrails is often a case of wondering whether there really is a mystery at all. Well, there's a lot of other conspiracy theories that has been found in the world. One that I found fascinating was the idea that AIDS was actually constructed as a weapon. Now, chemtrails aren't the first time a conspiracy theory has revolved around the government unleashing chemical weapons on its own population. One of the most pervasive theories in modern times relates to the emergence and terrifying effects of AIDS during the last 5 decades. Arriving in the public consciousness with incredible urgency and seemingly out of nowhere, this hideously deadly disease swept through countries and communities with devastating effect. As a means of trying to explain why this disease had arrived so suddenly, some people turned towards the idea it had been created by man with the intention of being exactly what it was designed to be: a lethal, mysterious disease. Only man, they suggested, could truly create a plague so dangerous. And this has led to the enduring theory that HIV and AIDS virus were created as a weapon before being unleashed on the world. Well, the world's experienced terrible diseases before. During the Middle Ages, the Black Death destroyed huge swaths of the population of Europe, Asia, and anywhere else it could reach. Epidemics like the Spanish flu have, as recently as the early 20th century, shown just how unprepared we might be for the sudden emergence of a deadly new disease. But in recent times, the best example of a previously unheard of illness that had caused such utter destruction is, in fact, AIDS. The disease seemingly arrived out of nowhere, technically discovered in the 1980s by a French researcher. But as the effects upon certain communities that brought it to the realization of the public, transmitted sexually or intravenously, it made its way quickly through certain demographics, such as homosexual communities and drug users. The smaller communities on the fringes of society soon saw themselves wiped out. Quickly, news reports picked up on the epidemic. It was a disease without a cure, one that killed those who contracted the disease with seemingly a 100% mortality rate. There was confusion over how the disease would be spread and over who might have it. Say that AIDS scared people would be an understatement. Even outside of the communities most obviously affected, there was a fear and confusion just about how quickly it might spread and who might be safe. To start with, let's understand the current theory of the development of AIDS. Acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, to give the disease its full name, affects those who have contracted the human immunodeficiency virus, otherwise known as HIV. Researching the history of AIDS, we have to look at the history of HIV. The virus can be traced to a very similar virus found in simians in West Central Africa. Whether it evolved or was simply closely related or was even purposely modified, we just don't know. What we are aware of, though, is that simian immunodeficiency virus, or SIV, is the key to understanding the history of AIDS and how it came to affect humans. Scientists now suggest that the virus spread out of West Central Africa sometime in the last century, and just as viruses are wont to do, began to spread its dangerous influence wider and wider. For a long time, the arrival of AIDS seemed like a plague from some divine being. Religious figures are quick to try and blame the morality of the fringe members of society who seem most prone to contracting the disease. Others were happy to ignore the suffering simply because they weren't among the most at-risk demographics. Situations like this, misinformation and rumors spread like wildfire. Either the rumors and theories were emerging from among the affected communities themselves or seemed to offer hope of some sort of cure, and they were told as ghost stories by the unaffected portions of society, almost as a warning to not stray too far into the fringe elements of society. And this context was ripe for the emergence of one of America's most enduring conspiracy theories. Well, for more information on the idea that AIDS was created in the laboratory and purposely unleashed on the population, it can help to turn to Phil Watson, who's executive director of the Black AIDS Institute located in Los Angeles. One of the communities most affected by the spread of disease was the African American demographic. Large amounts of the population economically disadvantaged after years of segregation and racial division. Within the country, there were higher rates of intravenous drug use, less funding for sex education classes in inner-city communities, and continued subjugation from the law enforcement communities. With history as one of the most persecuted sectors of American society, the African American community was hugely at risk from the spread of this disease. And when discussing current views of the virus, Phil Watson's Institute went out and interviewed 500 Black Americans. And their findings indicated that of those surveyed, almost half believed the disease was created by man. A quarter of these people felt that the disease was created in a laboratory controlled by the government. Of the 500 interviewed, at least 12 suggested the AIDS had been created by the CIA. As well as this, over half the people thought of any kind of cure for the disease was purposely being withheld from poor communities. And just under half believed that any new drugs that were being released was simply tests in which the government used the population as guinea pigs. AIDS, for the 15% of people, was a kind of genocide unleashed upon the people. The African American community's view of AIDS is similar in effect to the idea that crack cocaine is purposely created by the CIA as a form of population control and purposely spread by Ronald Reagan's Republican government to subdue and demonize the black community. The view of AIDS as a weapon has many institutional backers. The Nation of Islam promotes the view that the virus was created by the government, who've colluded with pharmaceutical companies in order to commit genocide. Reverend Jeremiah Wright, a leading figure in certain communities, has also put forward similar theories and quotes Leonard Horowitz in discussions of AIDS having been created as a weapon. One of the most important pieces of evidence comes from Wangari Maathai, who was a Nobel Peace Prize laureate noted for his environmental activism in 2004. Being interviewed by Time magazine, Wangari was asked about his views on AIDS as a manufactured disease and reiterated his belief that AIDS was a biological weapon designed and created by members of developed nations with the express purpose of eliminating black people. He did acknowledge he had no idea who actually created the disease and later retracted a huge portion of his comments, stating he didn't believe that AIDS was created by white people to destroy African Americans. Despite the prevalence of those beliefs in certain communities, though, society at large seemed quick to dismiss the idea of AIDS as being created in a laboratory. But is that concept so far-flung? Recently, declassified intelligence reports have detailed experiments that were taking place in Los Alamos, Cold Spring Harbor, and Fort Detrick, Maryland, as early as 1910. Titled Common Genetic Alterations of RNA, the experiments involve scientists mixing combinations of extant diseases such as Maida visna virus found in sheep and bovine leukemia virus. An outbreak of the former hit Iceland over the course of 2 decades between 1930 and 1950 and killed every single sheep. But neither virus is harmful to humans. In fact, only a few strains of viruses have leapt between species. These tend to be the truly dangerous ones, such as yellow fever, dengue fever, and Lassa fever. Nevertheless, these animal viruses were purposefully injected into human tissue samples and process repeated until the virus themselves mutated, eventually incorporating human genes. Well, experiments such as these show the willingness to test and experiment on the tenable nature of diseases affecting humans. Biological warfare, though now chiefly outlawed by international treaty, was once big business. During the Cold War, the competition with the Soviets not only meant Americans needed to better understand disease when compared to their communist counterparts, but should the worst come to worst, they should have the upper hand in any form of warfare. An incurable, quick-spreading disease can be the ideal way to infect a large portion of the population without the need to destroy the infrastructure that might be damaged during, for example, a nuclear attack. The various peaks and troughs of the Cold War had usually provided Americans with a theater in which to test its various new weapons. And the close of World War II had kick-started a nuclear age, with the U.S. dropping atomic bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima in clear view of the Russians. Likewise, the war in Vietnam provided Americans with the chance to test chemical weapons such as the infamous Agent Orange. But by the time the 1980s rolled around and Ronald Reagan had taken charge of the country, the existence of a large-scale testing theory of such magnitude was simply not there. Instead, according to conspiracy theory, Reagan and the Pentagon decided to launch AIDS into the poorest areas of the country and study its effects. Well, as mentioned before, the theory of crack cocaine being similarly used as a means of population control during the time is not dissimilar. The theory of crack being introduced by the CIA into African American communities runs alongside Reagan's war on drugs, which would eventually prove to be disastrous and would result in the incarceration of a huge number of black Americans on relatively minor drug charges. While crack was an addictive substance that got its users hooked, AIDS was a silent killer that moved from needles to needle. We're to believe the conspiracy theories, the Paris effects of crack cocaine and AIDS arriving in America almost in tandem had a devastating effect on the country's poorest communities. Trying to prove that AIDS was created in a lab, though, is a difficult task. With the majority of the evidence pointing toward an emergence from West Central Africa, some have suggested after being developed early part of the century was eventually planted in a foreign country in order to better distance the U.S. from blame when the disease finally emerged. But as we've eventually discovered, the involvement of the CIA in numerous drug deals with cartels throughout South America in the 70s and 80s, we might one day find a smoking gun that links one of the world's most deadly diseases to the Pentagon. And as technology advances, this may well be found coded in the virus itself. Could even lead to a cure being discovered. But until then, though, the theory that AIDS was developed as a weapon and used on the fringe members of American society remains very much a living theory. Well, on that note, we come to the end of today's show. We'll be back tomorrow. On Monday, because it's just Friday. But once again, you'll be listening to Ken Hudnall on the Ken Hudnall Show. Until then, have a truly great weekend.